Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Meantime, the House of Representatives passed its first bill of the year on Tuesday. This is the Laken Riley Act. It originally passed the House in March, but notably, Monet, the vote this time was 264 to 159. That is 13 more yeses than the bill received in March, and 48 Democrats voting along with most Republicans to pass that bill. Let's listen to one of the sponsors, Mike Collins, on Fox News before the vote.
These people are here. They shouldn't be here. They came here illegally, and they are harming our people. And we have the opportunity today to change that. We can get this through the House. We can get this through the Senate. We're seeing good movement over there. We've got an excellent senator in Katie Britt. She is a bulldog. I know she's from Alabama, but she's a bulldog. And she is charging the way, and she picked up Fetterman, and we've got the opportunity to pick up more over there. And I believe they can pass this on Friday, and by gosh, I believe this could be sitting on President Trump's desk when he sits down his very first day.
Monet, what does this bill do, and are you as optimistic as Mike Collins is about its prospects in the Senate?
So the Laken Riley Act has two major provisions, both of which are intended to make it harder for illegal migrants in the United States to become repeat offenders and commit crimes that would harm Americans. The first one essentially allows the federal government to issue detainers to make sure that illegal migrants who have been charged with theft or with burglary can be detained by the federal government if they aren't already being held in the custody of a state or city. And so this goes directly to the perpetrator of the murder of Laken Riley, for whom the act is named. This was a young woman who was killed at the University of Georgia in February of last year by a guy who had been arrested first for entering the country illegally and then arrested several more times for crimes that he committed, but never held long enough, Immigration and Customs Enforcement says, for him to be brought into federal custody and for them to begin the deportation process. And so the bill intends to make sure that illegal immigrants who are charged are held long enough that they'll be able to enter into the processing system that could deport them. The second provision of the bill essentially creates a right of action for state attorneys general to be able to sue the head of the Department of Homeland Security when illegal immigrants commit crimes that harm the state or their residents. And so Supreme Court precedents have made it very difficult for anyone to sue the federal government for policy failures. This would essentially create standing for parties who believe that they've been harmed by lax enforcement by the federal government to say, we are going to compel the Secretary of Homeland Security to enforce the law by holding him civilly liable whenever there are damages. And in terms of the political prospects, it does seem as if a whole lot more Democrats are getting on board. As you mentioned, many more of them voted for it this time around than did last year. And there's some momentum building in the Senate. It would need 60 votes to be able to overcome the filibuster. Right now, it seems like there might be about 5 Democrats already in favor, and they're set to vote on it very soon. So it's not necessarily likely that they'll be able to cross that threshold, but I think that you're seeing a lot of popular response to the problem of migrant crime and a lot of Democrats feeling the pressure to show that they're serious about doing something about it.
Bill, what are your thoughts on this, on the first of these provisions that Monet lays out? I mean, there's some criticism that it lacks due process if it is requiring ICE to hold people who have not been convicted of the offense yet. On the other hand, these are people who are in the country illegally, and if the police have gone through charging someone with theft or burglary, generally they don't do that based on nothing. On the second of these provisions, I guess the concern is whether it is going to throw more portions of immigration policy to the courts if there's going to be a state that is going to say this decision by the executive branch is harming my state, and so we would like the court to interpret that and decide that issue. Maybe that's not the best approach if it's taking some of these immigration choices out of the hands of the president of the United States, even though you can understand why, when this bill was initially drawn up during the Biden administration, during the lax enforcement of the border, and before we knew who the next president of the United States was going to be, that it wasn't going to be Joe Biden, you can understand why Republicans wrote the bill that way.
Yeah, the first thing to say about the case, I watched some of the trial. It is different from many of the other crimes in that when an illegal immigrant commits a crime like this, especially that one who has brushed up against the law before, people wonder, they view it as all unnecessary. It's not like regular crime where you're always going to get a certain percentage of thefts, murders, everything. This one could be prevented. And she was an exceptionally, I think, sweet young woman with a bright future ahead of her. So people really feel that. And they feel that the people that didn't enforce the law are really callous about the consequences. I mean, the other consequence we saw in New York where a woman went up in flames because of a guy who snuck in from Guatemala. So people are fed up with the government. Now, I agree with you. I don't think the first point, that to me is a matter of common sense. If the guy has criminal acts, I think I should be able to hold him. You know, if he crossed the border illegally, I think that should be enough. Then the second part, I'm more sympathetic to your argument because I think accountability in our system is not by empowering people to sue and so forth. It's political accountability. And remember, one reason the Democrats lost the White House is because of the border. It's because of all these things. So there has been some accountability. It's not perfect, but it's kind of the way our system was designed. And I trust that a little more than I do, as you mentioned, the lawsuits and so forth, empowering all sorts of litigation.
The bigger question, it seems to me, is whether this suggests that there is some real action going to be potentially coming from Congress on immigration. Monet will give you the last word on that point, but the fact that 48 Democrats are voting for this bill in the House suggests that they have taken on board one of the lessons of the November election results. And this bill, even if it passed the Senate, I don't think would be the last word from this new Republican trifecta in Washington on immigration. There are going to be more battles to come. Maybe Congress will go back to some of these ideas like raising the threshold for claiming asylum in the United States. And now I'm starting to wonder how many Democrats would come along with that as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Democrats have gotten the message of the American people loud and clear when it comes to the border and particularly immigrant crime. You can remember in the lead up to the election that folks like Bob Casey and Sherrod Brown, both of whom reliably vote with President Biden, were running ads talking about getting tough on border security and essentially siding with Donald Trump's immigration agenda. So that is a huge shift, and that's going to continue into the new administration. I do think that Republicans are teeing up a border bill right now, which would include potential restrictions. What they're very likely to get in that bill is funding for new border agents, funding for the border wall, all of these brick and mortar type of provisions that will have some beneficial effect in terms of reducing the number of people crossing. I think it will be much more difficult for them to be able to get changes in immigration law that will, for example, make it harder for people to seek asylum. Even though that there's a broad conservative consensus around that, it's difficult to get those kinds of things into a reconciliation bill. It's difficult to make sure every single one of the very small House Republican majority is on board for those types of provisions. And so I think that that's part of the reasoning behind the Laken Riley Act. They want to try to get these policy changes through this other vehicle that they think has a good chance of passing because it might be difficult to do in a different legislative vehicle. So they'll definitely be trying, especially if the Laken Riley Act doesn't manage to pass this week. But I don't think it's a guarantee that they'll be able to get these major policy changes that would have the biggest effect on tamping down the border crisis.
Thank you, Monet and Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.